Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Don't laugh. All right, you laugh a bit if you want. Have you ever met anyone who couldn't go on holiday because there weren't enough flights? I try desperately to avoid these sort of hobby horses, but none of us are perfect. And occasionally I do have these little observations that I appreciate are probably a bit fatuous, are certainly simplistic, and are probably wrong. Call it the Achilles heel, if you would, of my rationality. I get a bit like on grammar schools, a couple of other issues as well, where I can actually sort of still hold a position despite all the evidence explaining to me that I shouldn't. I've never met anyone who couldn't go on holiday because there weren't enough flights. I suppose the flights can be full, they often are, but then you go the next day, don't you? Or you possibly go somewhere else. I live in the flight path of Heathrow. I phoned 999 for the first time yesterday. I genuinely had the most surreal... I only mention it because it was near home and there were lots of planes going overhead. It's astonishing, and I must say thank you to Sandy, the paramedic, who was there within moments to help the gentleman that I was helping, who had quite a nasty fall. Watching the NHS in action is now becoming poignant, isn't it? It's actually now becoming poignant because you know it can't last. I told you 2 years ago, and you laughed at me, that the NHS would be next after Brexit. There's a column in the Daily Mail today suggesting a referendum on things like paying for NHS services directly. You think I make this stuff up? It's not hard. Just read a bit. Have a look at history. It always happens. The pendulum moves. And things like the welfare state, the National Health Service, all of these things that are genuinely socialist principles brought in after the Second World War because they knew, the ruling classes knew, that after ordinary people had died in their hundreds of thousands, there's no way we were going to go back to the kind of world where children would routinely die of starvation, even as recently at the end of the 18th century. I've been reading about Thomas Coram when I was on holiday, the guy that founded the Foundling Hospital. And I love the Foundling Hospital down in... It's up near... It's in Fitzrovia. What's that big square called? Up near... come on, where SOAS is? Yeah, Russell Square. It's up near there, and it's a beautiful place if you ever get the chance to have a look round. And Thomas Coram, we're going to be talking about Heathrow, by the way. But as I mentioned Heathrow, I remembered phoning 999 last night because there were lots of planes going overhead. And I remembered to say thank you to Sandy, and then I remembered why I'm so worried about the NHS disappearing, and that led me to some of my holiday reading about Thomas Coram, who founded the Foundling Hospital. So if anyone sitting near you listening to this is looking a bit blank, just fill them in on quite how this tangent managed to appear. So Thomas Coram was a sea captain in the 18th century. 18th century? Yeah, back end of the 18th century. And I didn't know how commonplace infant death was in that era. And yet I've been to the Foundling Hospital. I've done some work with the Coram Foundation, which now deals with adoption and fostering and issues like that. They're a beautiful charity. And I just didn't realise. I don't quite understand how. So you had these stories. They had a lottery at the gates of the Foundling Hospital. So a mother would come with her baby and they would draw lots. And I think if you got a white ball, your baby would be taken. If you got a black ball, your baby wouldn't be. And if you got a red ball, you went on a waiting list. And because I have such a soft spot for the Coram Hospital as an adopted person, I never really thought about the red balls. Why would you, in that era, want to give your baby to a hospital, to an orphanage? And the answer is because if your baby wasn't taken, your baby would probably die. What would it die of? Well, depending where in the country you were, quite possibly starvation. And that wasn't that long ago. And yet at that time in history, running a stately home, a Downton Abbey type operation, would involve hundreds of liveried staff, all of whom were dedicating their entire working lives to providing luxury and lifestyle for a tiny, tiny, tiny number of incredibly rich people. So when that kind of mindset, the kind of people who secretly dream of going back to those kind of days, when you had a kind of... Well, it's actually the ultimate aim of most fascistic ideals, isn't it? To have a tiny number of people like me who are in charge and all the other people are either sort of enslaved or indentured to us. You don't have to look far. I always tell you about St Catherine's Dock as well. 30, 40,000 homes destroyed to build St Catherine's Dock, none of whom were relocated. Just take your chances. Off you go. Come back to the Second World War, there's no way you're going to be able to treat people like that. That's why all the stately homes went into decline around the sort of first half of this century. You couldn't sustain that anymore, those 19th century models of patronage. You simply couldn't. Look at some of the support Rees-Mogg gets, and you know that it could come back. You have people literally doffing their cap and tugging their forelock and welcoming the kind of politics that would see them rendered serfs in a revivified feudalism. So the NHS, when you watch it in action, and I bet old Sandy, the paramedic, wasn't expecting this when I promised I'd give him a mention on the show today. I watch it with poignancy and fear in my heart now, because I watch what they're doing, and I look at how much they're struggling, and then I look at the numbers, and I hear people. I heard a bit of Sheila's show yesterday. I was coming back from Gatwick, and caller after caller ringing in to complain about how doctors and nurses aren't our own and we don't train up our own. It's absolutely bovine racism that's taken hold in the country. You get that astonishing vision of where it leads. And it leads to the column in the Daily Mail today saying, let's have a referendum on whether people should pay for their NHS services. And it all follows the same pattern. The tides of history come round and round and round again. And that's why I say that I watched the NHS in action last night. And if you're listening, Ernest, I hope you're feeling a little bit better. But I watched the NHS in action last night, and I, for the first time ever, felt a modicum of fear. Because they're coming for it, just like I told you they would. And because you've got legitimate concerns about immigration, you're not going to notice what you've got until it's gone. Which is quite an odd introduction to a conversation about the third runway at Heathrow, but we are where we are. 10 minutes after 11 is the time. Do you remember that fellow? What was his name? He used to be Mayor of London, promised that he wouldn't shut any ticket offices or fire stations, and then shut loads. Oh, I can't remember. Anyway, see if this jogs your memory.
John McDonnell. Yes, John. I will join you. I will join you. I will lie down with you in front of those bulldozers and stop the building, stop the construction of that third runway.
Boris Johnson there, pledging to resist furiously any attempt to build a third runway at Heathrow. Boris Johnson, of course, also the Foreign Secretary, who has, I think uniquely in British history, imperilled a British citizen imprisoned falsely by a rogue regime in Iran, made her plight worse, but kept his job. A couple of other things. The greatest hits of Boris Johnson, in terms of the disasters over which he has presided and the lies which he's told to everybody from his wives right through to his constituents, it would take hours. It would take several volumes, wouldn't it? You'd be here for weeks if you wanted to detail every single calumny, deception and dissembling, self-serving lie that Boris Johnson has inflicted upon the British people. And still they go, oh, yeah, it's very funny. Ho, ho, ho. There he is talking about Heathrow. So I have two angles in on this. I do want to come to a better understanding of why we need a third runway, because I don't like feeling stupid. And when I say things like, I've never met anyone who can't go on holiday, I feel a bit stupid, even though I mean it. Talk about that. But I also want to talk about him a bit. Because obviously Chris Grayling is the emblem of incompetence in government. But if you want to look for the emblem of corruption, the corruption of political life, it's Boris Johnson, isn't it? The idea that someone can lie so seamlessly, so smilingly, so smoothly, and know that he's lying. Fire stations, ticket offices, imprisoned British citizens, and now Heathrow. Needed a seat, remember, when he handed in the mayoralty, when he ceased to be Mayor of London, needed a safe seat. Uxbridge got him, bless him. And he promised, because Uxbridge is very much affected by flights overhead, he promised the people of Uxbridge, while seeking their votes, that he would furiously resist the third runway at Heathrow. So we'll do a little bit on Heathrow itself. Don't laugh. I think I might ask you what an honourable Boris Johnson would do. And I know that's a bit like asking you what a bit like asking you what a duck that can't quack would do. But what would an honourable... If Boris Johnson had an iota of honour, what would he do now? Because this is really, really illustrative of how messy things are. Whatever your politics are, you shouldn't care what party this man belongs to. You should care only that he holds one of the greatest offices this nation has. And in order to achieve that office, he had to be elected to the House of Commons. And in order to get elected to the House of Commons, he pledged to the voters of Uxbridge that he would resist the building of a third runway at Heathrow furiously, to the point of, laughingly, describing his desire to lie down in front of the bulldozers. He is now a member of the cabinet in which, or yesterday, the cabinet which essentially passed the notion of a third runway being built at Heathrow. What would he do if he had any honour? It doesn't matter if you're going to answer this bit of the question. It doesn't matter whether you are pro-third runway or anti-third runway. It doesn't matter whether you are Conservative or Labour. It doesn't matter whether you are Remain or Leave. It doesn't matter. All that matters is that you are British, or that you have a vote in this country, and you genuinely care about parliamentary democracy, about political accountability, about honesty, about transparency, and about truth. Because what we have now, and I know this sounds a little bit portentous and possibly even a little bit over the top, but that's only because we've become so corrupted, we've become so inured to the appalling conduct of these characters. We don't notice now. It's a bit like Trump, isn't it? You just don't notice now the latest lie, the latest piece of evidence of profound dishonesty and moral corruption. Boris Johnson promised the voters of Uxbridge that he would resist the building of the third runway at Heathrow. If he has any honour, if he had any honour, what would he do now, do you think? 0345 6060 973. But I do want to start with you explaining to me why we need another runway at Heathrow, because I know it's fatuous, but I do quite like it as a catchphrase. I've never met anyone who couldn't go on holiday. Where we will, first of all, establish why or whether we need another runway at Heathrow. And then we'll have a look at what this man should do, this man here who pledged in the event of being elected MP for Uxbridge. Well, you listen.
John McDonnell, yes, John, I will join you. I will join you. I will lie down with you in front of those bulldozers and stop the building, stop the construction of that third runway.
So, I'm sorry to go on, but I'm just trying to think of another walk of life in which your job interview would involve you promising to do something, and then you did the polar opposite. So, if I came here and I promised, I don't know, I'll have 1 million listeners by 2018, and I had 100,000, I'd fully expect to get my sandwiches wrapped in a roadmap. Well, that's a bad example, isn't it? Because I've got no control over that, really. If you went for a job as a lifeguard and you promised that in the event of a child struggling in the water, you'd jump in faster than you could say Jack Robinson, and then a child drowned on your watch and you stayed on the side of the pool. Or if you got a job as a store detective, and you promised that you were going to clamp down on shoplifting, and then it was found out that actually you were running a shoplifting ring under the noses of the shop managers, you'd expect to lose your job. If you promised, again, it's got to be something you have control over, so it's not like you're a footballer and you promised to score 100 goals, but in order to get a job, you promised that you would do something once you'd got that job, and then you didn't do it. I don't think we'd keep our jobs. I've given up wondering how Boris Johnson survives in political life. I understand why he survives. Doff cap, tug forelock, vote Rees-Mogg. People are subservient. People are a lot more deferential than I ever realised. People were not lucky enough to have parents who taught them that they can be anything they wanted to be, that they have just as much right to the glittering prizes as people were born with much bigger silver spoons in their mouth. And most people aren't raised like that. It's taken me 46 years to realise it. Please raise your children like that. Please raise your children to believe that they're just as good, if not better, than the Rees-Moggs and the Johnsons. But we have a deferential nation. We are a curiously feudal population. So the rules that we would expect to abide by ourselves, we kind of think people like Boris Johnson and Donald Trump and Jacob Rees-Mogg shouldn't have to abide by. It's really scary. So in the imagined event of Boris Johnson being an honourable man who is expected to abide by the sort of rules that ordinary folk like you and I abide by, what would happen if you promised to do something in the event of getting a job? What should he do now? Seriously. 21 minutes after 11 is the time. Back to the question of why, or indeed whether we need it. Stephen is in Marlborough in Wiltshire. Stephen, what can you tell us?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Stephen.
First-time caller.
You're very welcome.
Be gentle.
Of course I will.
So I retired last year after 37 years as an air traffic controller. And one of the phrases that I used most often was to tell the aircraft that to expect about a 15 to 20 minute delay to land at Heathrow.
Right.
Now, on that basis, take a 747, for example, would be burning round about 10 tonnes an hour of fuel.
Good Lord.
To go absolutely nowhere.
Yes.
So it would go round in circles.
Over my house.
Possibly over your house.
Yes.
I don't know where you actually live. One of the 4 stacks that go into Heathrow. So on a regular basis, we would have between 15 and 20 aircraft holding to go into Heathrow. Just on that matter, the capacity at Heathrow needs to be increased. We brought in a system that allowed us to reduce the spacing between the aircraft to go to land at Heathrow, but even that hasn't been enough. So the actual building of this runway is long overdue. Now, we talk about politicians not knowing what they're talking about. Justin Greening yesterday, from 6 in the morning till 10 at night, was spouting on about low point-to-point traffic. But the clear situation is that passengers and airlines don't want to fly to the regions. Simple as that. If you take Gatwick as an example, they have very few American services left anymore. As soon as slots become available at Heathrow, the airlines move because that's where the passengers want to go.
You lost me at the end. I think I was doing really well up until you mentioned Justin Greening. Why? They don't want to...
So her point was that we need to develop the regions, and that the airlines, we should be encouraging...
Oh, so was she speaking against Heathrow?
Correct.
That's why. Remember, I've been on my holidays. I missed that. She's a rebel now on the backbenches.
Well, yes, she is, because her constituency is quite close to Heathrow.
South London, isn't it? Yeah.
But the point is, you can't force the airlines to operate services where passengers don't want to go.
No, I get that completely. But there's going to be loads more flights. So at what point... Don't laugh at me if I sound stupid, because you've spent 30 years in this business, right? And I have to hit the ground running on all manner of subjects every single day. But what happens when it's full up again? Is that plausible? I mean, because there's going to be loads more flights. So I understand the argument saying we haven't got room for the flights we've currently got, so we're going to build another runway. But no one's saying we're going to build another runway to cope with the stacking that you described. They're building another runway so that there can be loads more flights.
Oh, okay. So the company that I used to work for, we brought an initiative about 5 years ago to try and reduce the stacking.
Yes.
And what happened there was that if aircraft as far away as Germany were actually slowing down to get into Heathrow because we knew that they were going to get a delay, we probably shaved 2 to 3 minutes off the average hold time for each aircraft.
Yes.
Now that doesn't sound a lot, but actually it was quite a major change. How we look where air traffic is going to be in another 20 to 30 years when potentially that capacity is full.
Yeah.
I honestly don't know, but we need to resolve what's going on.
The current problems need to be resolved. And we can't afford to because really there's no earthly way that we should have these planes flying so close to a major city. The airport should be 20 miles out of town.
Well, it is what it is.
I know. It is what it is.
And short of going and building something like, well, God help us, Boris Island, because actually, from an air traffic point of view, that would have been an absolute non-starter, because to get into there, you'd have been relying on the Dutch ATC system to actually do most of the work for landing at Heathrow. For landing at the new airport, and it simply wouldn't have worked from an air traffic point of view.
I get that. So, I mean, this is the difference between pragmatism and principle, I suppose, isn't it? In principle, in a world of bottomless pockets and talented, visionary politicians acting entirely in the national interest with their eye on the long term rather than the short term, we'd probably start from scratch somewhere else.
Of course, and one of the problems that we've got as a nation is that we were the leaders in most of the things that happened, be it the underground, and Heathrow is a good example that instead of being able to start from scratch, we tag little bits on to try and make it work, and eventually you finish up with something that is some sort of out-of-date monolith, if you like.
Yes. No, I get it, and that's why it has to be done, because of what is, not what will be. It will address what will be, but in the urgency, the immediacy, we need to address what it is. Do you have a view on Boris Johnson or not?
Well...
I mean, bearing in mind it's 26 minutes after 11 in the morning and there are children listening to this programme.
So this is an individual who came out in favour of leaving Europe, and
Yes.
people really didn't know which way he was going to go when he made that announcement a couple of months before the referendum. Is he politically motivated, and that was the only way he was going to try and get on in his career? Probably. Actually, I think he's a complete buffoon, but that's...
It's very generous. Very generous of you, Stephen. Very diplomatic. 26, nearly 27 minutes after 11. 03456060973. Do you know what he just did, old Stephen? In many ways, he popped the balloon of political debate, because I'm beginning to wonder, as I approach my dotage, whether or not actually most furious debates boil down to the question of what is possible and what is not. Don't they call politics the art of the possible? I think I may have misremembered that slightly. So, in many ways, Corbyn, I suppose, represents, to my mind, the politically impossible in some ways, and that appeals enormously to people who think that we are capable in the short term of undertaking root and branch change. You get the Kinnock approach, which would probably be closer to Corbyn in principle, but in practice he thinks, well, we need to do that and we need to accept this. As Stephen said, it is what it is. So, yeah, we should be building an airport 20 miles outside a major city, like almost every other airport you've ever visited is. The idea that you have these planes flying over densely populated residential areas is absurd. But it is what it is. Heathrow is where it is. I think it was a military base, or it was a tiny... I've seen some pictures of Heathrow in its very, very early days, and they're charming, but it was small. But it is where it is, and it is one of the biggest airports in the world, and the passengers make their way there. So we need another runway. And that possibly gives the lie to all the debates we've had on LBC over the years about whether or not we need another runway. Of course, if I lived in Longford or Sipson or Poyle or even Stanwell, I wouldn't be very happy about this, because you're going to come and knock my house down. But it doesn't actually change the long-term pragmatic reality, which is this is the only thing that we can do on a plausible and affordable level. It stinks in many, many ways, but it's the only thing we can do on a plausible and affordable level, which maybe even Boris Johnson understood when he promised to lie down in front of the bulldozers, but as ever, he was thinking about what's going to get me over the nearest finish line, what's going to get me the most benefit, regardless of truth and honesty, what's going to boost stocks in Boris Johnson the most in Uxbridge in the run-up to the 2015 election. Answer, I'll pretend that I will passionately oppose this runway. The plebs will vote for me, and by the time the runway's built, they'll have forgotten that I promised to lie down in a bulldozer. And do you know what? Apart from tiny, tiny, tiny little outposts of the British media, tiny little outposts of the British media like this programme that we've built together, it will be forgotten, and he will be forgiven. You, of course, if you're a constituent of Boris Bulldozer Johnson, I want to take issue with this. The best way to get involved, because he's never going to appear on this programme, is to email him, and that is boris.johnson.mp@parliament.uk. Speaking of mayors of London, past and present, Sadiq Khan's with us tomorrow. Top of the list of questions that he will be asked to address will be, of course, this resurgence in crime. Cressida Dick, the Met Commissioner, this morning explaining for the umpteenth time that it is inextricably linked to central government cuts. But the political climate in this country at the moment is such that an awful lot of people will be shutting their ears and closing their eyes to that simple explanation and trying to pin the responsibility on Sadiq Khan. I shall police that tomorrow. I shall police it like a superintendent. More on Boris Johnson and Heathrow up until 12, and then I'm going to ask how the trains... I'll go away for a week and the entire rail network collapses. I need you to explain why. And you're not allowed to say because Chris Grayling's in charge, even though that probably is part of the answer, if not all of it. How have things gone so badly? I have a friend of mine, he's a stand-up comedian, so he often has to get home from London quite late at night, and he took a photograph of himself on a rail replacement service going from London to Hertfordshire. And he was the only person on the bus. It was quite a fancy bus as well, you know, one of the ones with sinks. There's a little sink and a toilet on it. But he was the only person on it. So as he pointed out in his Facebook post this morning, that effectively was a 53-seater taxi for him, with one passenger in it, going all the way from London to Hertfordshire. He took a selfie to prove it. 52 empty seats behind him. Absolutely hilarious. Except not really hilarious, because, you know, costs and... management and Chris Grayling. So you're not allowed to ring in and say it's all gone wrong because Chris Grayling. That's not an answer. It's going to become rhyming slang soon, isn't it? How are you getting on at school? I'm Chris Grayling, my Latin. But that's not allowed on this programme. We want more serious questions. For example, staying with another member of Theresa May's cabinet, the cabinet of all the talents, this fella who pledged when he was seeking election in Uxbridge, that he would greet the building of a third runway at Heathrow thusly.
John McDonnell, yes, John, I will join you. I will join you. I will lie down with you in front of those bulldozers and stop the building, stop the construction of that third runway.
So what do you think he should do? This is Theresa May's official spokesman speaking yesterday. I think that's the fellow who used to be political editor of the Daily Mail. No minister will be permitted to campaign actively against the government position, nor publicly criticise or call into question the decision-making process itself. Ministers will not be permitted to speak against the government in the House. So much control, so much democracy, so much accountability, all that transparency. Boris Johnson, electoral pledge now being broken, ordered by a Prime Minister to shut up about it. If he had an iota of honour, what do you think he would do? Mick's in Yeovil. Mick, what do you reckon?
Oh, good morning, James.
Did I just wake you up? Had you nodded off during my introduction then? You had, hadn't you?
No, it's okay. It was a little bit of a delay on the phone there, I think.
Carry on.
So, being in Yeovil, we are some distance from the effects of a third runway at Heathrow, but certainly I agree with your sentiments that if we've got an issue with overload of the system now, what do we do once that third runway reaches capacity? Do we then look at building a fourth, or do we look at another airport altogether? But I think my real concern is the absence of continued conviction within politics, with politicians, and certainly with Boris's comments. Now, I would never be one to suggest that anybody lays themselves in front of a roller,
no.
But certainly the pledge that was made to his constituents was not an aspirational one. This was not simply saying, well, we're going to aim to reduce tax cuts in this area or aim to increase welfare payments in another. This
Brexit means Brexit or something like that. This was a specific, codified, formal promise while seeking election that is easy to keep.
Indeed, and this is really representative of what we're seeing here in our own constituency, where you have an MP that's representing the interests of Westminster and the interests of the Cabinet in their constituency, rather than speaking up for their constituents in Westminster.
It is. I mean, is it naive to suggest that possibly in a previous era, not that long ago, you wouldn't be able to sustain your position in Cabinet while passing the third runway, having promised to resist it furiously, describing it as undeliverable and vowing that it would be stopped? Would we once have seen ministerial blood on the proverbial carpet?
Well, I think Boris's position at the moment is very much torn between either his loyalty to the Cabinet and to Theresa May, or his loyalty to the constituents who elected him. And I think you turn your back on the needs of your constituents and the desires of your constituents at your own political peril. I appreciate there are tough decisions to be made, but I think this is the time where he has to take that stand and really stand by his convictions.
Yes. Well, I just don't hold your breath is all I would say. 39 minutes after 11 is the time. Hang on a minute. Is it Mick is that you stood against Marcus Fish? You stood for the Liberal Democrats against Marcus Fish, Mick, is that right?
No. We had an excellent candidate, Joe Roundell Green, who stood against Marcus in the last snap general election. I've been recently selected as the prospective parliamentary candidate to stand against him at the next general election, whenever that comes.
Did you hear his call to this programme?
I did. I caught up on it on your social media feed.
Excellent. Might come in useful come election time.
Yes, yeah, indeed. Thank you very much.
Get it out there. 11:40 is, of course, it might be too late by then. Ray is in Wandsworth. Ray, what have you got?
Hello, James.
Hello, Ray.
I was just going to pick up on your caller from the air traffic control who used to work there.
Yes.
I think he's probably talking about 10 years ago, because the industry has fundamentally changed. And, you know, we have much cleaner aircraft in the air, such as the Airbus A380 and so on. But Gatwick is clearly the option. You can fly direct to Austin, Boston, Buenos Aires, Denver, Fort Lauderdale, Orlando, many places.
There's no way you just did that off the top of your head.
No, because I just Googled it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, busted.
There was a lot of destinations out there.
I never Google when I'm live on air. Not in a million years.
But the point is, with our good old friend Boris,
yes,
who's going to be obviously lying in front of a roller, or driving the night bus home as Amber.
I think I've just broken my computer. I shouldn't have done that little comedy interlude there. Yes.
He should be standing up firm for his people in Uxbridge, Hillingdon, wherever it is he represents.
But it's up to them, isn't it? So they'll doff cap, tug, forelock, vote Boris Johnson, despite the fact that he's lied through his teeth to them.
Well, we'll just have to wait and see.
We'll have to wait and see. Just to go back, you obviously have a soft spot for Gatwick for whatever reason. I'm detecting this from my astonishing intuitions.
Yeah, I mean, let's face it, Gatwick has one runway. It's the busiest runway in the world, single runway.
Is it?
It's been needing a new runway since 1975, I think. So it's clearly the obvious choice. It affects less people because the aircraft flying over the country zones of Kent are rather than affecting everybody in West London and Berkshire. So, you know, Gatwick have got a credible lower cost proposition out there, and they're ready to rock and roll now. So I just don't understand why.
Well, what do you? Well, you do. I mean, what do you understand the rationale to be, or do you genuinely sit there, sort of open-mouthed and baffled? Because even if it's a slightly sinister analysis of, I think Zach Goldsmith yesterday isn't he supposed to resign as well now?
Yeah, I
can't remember. Or he already has once, hasn't he? Oh, this is more comebacks than Barbara Streisand. Anyway, the argument is that somehow we're kowtowing to big business, which obviously, as a Conservative MP worth billions of pounds, Zach Goldsmith is passionately opposed to big business.
We can't afford to fly into Heathrow. The fares are much higher. So what we're doing, if you think about where businesses won't be able to afford Heathrow, it's the most expensive airport to fly from. That's why airports like Gatwick are now full to capacity. Stansted's now getting much, much busier. Luton's nearly full. They're building the train link in. Businesses can't afford those high-ticket, expensive fares that Heathrow offers. It's a bit like saying, oh, here's a power station, expensive one, and here's a cheap one. But what we're going to do, we're going to expend the most expensive power station and give the most expensive fuel to people. What are people going to do? You know.
Man, you're making it all confusing. I boasted at the outset of this that I don't know, and then I thought I did know, and now I don't know again, and it's all your fault. Well, if there's all these planes circling my house, I appreciate it, not specifically my house, although it feels like that sometimes. So do the potholes, actually. It's beginning to feel like a personal vendetta, a Hounslow Council against me. But there's all these planes circling West London, where my house is. Then the argument at the beginning of the hour for building another runway was pretty strong, I felt.
Well, those aircraft should be going into Gatwick on their runway, so therefore we wouldn't have the circling issue.
But that's already the busiest runway in the world, you dolt.
I know, that's why we need another runway there. It's blindly obvious.
So why do business want it at Heathrow, not at Gatwick, then?
Yeah, we need to get on with Gatwick.
But why does business want it at Heathrow, not at Gatwick?
Well, they think that... I don't think all of business...
Well, obviously not, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. There is business, but... You know what? We just need to get on with Gatwick. We should have done it before. They can start building that runway
it's too late now, mate. That ship has sailed. That plane has flown.
We've got to see if all the Labour MPs vote for... because if I was the Labour MPs, I'd be saying, right, let's go for Gatwick.
Yeah, but then they've done that thing again. They've said it's going to bring loads of jobs to the north. They've got the SNP on side. It's game over. Labour won't be able to whip a result on this in a million years.
You look at the price of flights from Heathrow to Scotland in comparison to Gatwick to Scotland. You look at the price difference, and then you'll see...
I like this. I hope they pay you well at Gatwick. I hope they pay you well at Gatwick Airport, Ray.
I'm not paid. I work in the fashion industry now, actually.
We all work in the fashion industry, Ray. So some of us are aware of it, and some of us are not. It's coming up to 11:45, where one question is quite hard to answer, and the other question that we're covering this hour is incredibly easy to answer. The question that's quite hard to answer, oddly, is... should we build, is it right to have a third runway at Heathrow? The question that's really, really easy to answer is there any prospect of Boris Johnson behaving honourably with regard to his pledge to lie down in front of the bulldozers in the event of the third runway going ahead? A pledge he made while seeking the support of the good people of Uxbridge to become their elected member of Parliament. And the answer to that, in short, is... Jenny is in Staines. I nearly called you Johnny then, Jenny. What a lucky escape. What would you like to say?
I would like to say that I would like people to look up... I stood against Boris as an independent in Uxbridge, and I would like them to look up that when he was Mayor of London in 2008, he promised to get the homeless off the streets.
Don't make me defend Boris Johnson, but they all promised that.
Yeah, okay, but then again in 2011 when he stood again,
Yeah.
I think it was 2000, he made the same promise, and people fell for it.
Yes.
And I can't believe that he became the Mayor of London twice on one of the same promises.
He did.
So
He said
he
he wouldn't close any fire stations or ticket offices. How many ticket offices are left open now?
He is absolutely an unbelievable, barefaced liar.
Tell me something I don't know.
There, rubbing his hair and acting like a naughty schoolboy.
He rubs his hair before he goes on stage. Did you ever see that at the hustings? He makes himself look scruffier.
I was on stage with him when he was announced he was the MP.
Yes. Did you get any votes?
I think 110 or something.
That's outrageous.
But then I didn't start until December, and of course it cost me a fortune. But I hope to get the money together to do it again, if only to be able to stand there and tell people the truth about him.
Yes, well, that would be fun. I might sponsor you, or I'll get my friend who runs the T-shirt shop in Uxbridge to do you some free T-shirts. Would that help?
That would really help. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, have you ever? Hang on a minute. Have you ever been into balcony shirts?
No, I haven't actually.
Well, you must go. Go and ask for Scott. Tell him I sent you.
Scott. Okay,
Yeah.
then.
Scott in
do.
balcony shirts. So James said you could do me some free T-shirts to tell everyone what a big fat face Boris Johnson is.
I will do that.
Covering all the bases today, Jenny. Tom's in Hounslow. Tom, if we're quiet, we could probably hear a plane overhead, couldn't we?
Yeah, well, I'm right in underneath the Heathrow flight path.
There we are. I was in Hounslow yesterday. Go on, Tom. What do you want to say?
Well, we're just on a demolition job, taking down a huge premises.
Yeah.
That is apparently eventually going to be the place where they make the aeroplane food for a new Terminal 6. Believe it or not.
Well, I do believe it, but was that going to happen anyway, even if they weren't building the third runway?
Well, they're going to have a third runway, I presume, but...
Why have you rung me, though? What are you telling me that... I mean, are you saying it's already underway, or you're saying they're already knocking stuff down?
Yeah, it's already underway. There's definitely works going on in the airport as well for a new baggage area that will be... Like, it's a huge excavation that they're going to be putting underneath...
but this is good. You've got a job, mate. You can't start complaining. It keeps keeping you in beer.
I'm not complaining, to be honest with you.
No. Exactly. Could be. Well, all right. So, I mean, well, that's where the money comes from then as well. In the short term, the infrastructure investment, people need paying, buildings need building, holes need digging.
Yeah. So I would like, I know it's got to go through Parliament, but I would nearly, if I could put a bet on, I'm pretty sure it's going to go ahead.
Oh, well, no, I am as well. I was just wondering what Boris Johnson should do after promising that he wouldn't let it go ahead.
Now, I've got a bulldozer right here if he wants to come out and lie down in front of it.
You'd have to form an orderly queue, Tom, judging from my inbox. How hard is it to drive a bulldozer, just out of interest?
Oh, pretty easy once you've been doing it for a few years.
Well, no, I was thinking about if I'd only been doing it for a few seconds, how hard is it? Is it got gears?
Oh, yeah, you just push forward and go, mate.
So it's like a Dodgem?
Yeah, nearly.
But with a bit of reverse. What are the brakes like?
Pardon?
What are the brakes like?
Oh, very good. Depending on who's in front of you.
Behave yourself. 11:53 is the time. Trains next. I want you to tell me your... look, this sounds rubbish. It sounds like I'm doing, I don't know, North Norfolk Digital Radio. Give me a call and tell me about your train-related nightmare. But it's actually a national issue. 2 parking tickets next week. Potholes the week after that. Genuinely, in the next hour. How bad is it? I've been away. I actually haven't followed much domestic news. And it appears that the entire train network has gone into some form of freefall since Chris Grayling took over. The answer to the question of how have things gone so bad so fast, however, is not allowed to be, in the first instance, well, Chris Grayling, James. Niall's in Belfast. Niall, what would you like to say?
James, love your work, by the way.
You're very kind.
Really essential voice in this day and age.
Thanks,
in a crazy time of politics. One of the things I just wanted to say is that I think we're missing the point about Boris Johnson, and given the fact I'm from Northern Ireland, everything gets back to Brexit.
Yes.
Boris Johnson and his cronies have decided to take the United Kingdom out of Europe, taking us away from near markets, meaning that the EU is cut off to us, which means we're going to need Heathrow's freight capabilities to send British goods further afield.
Yes.
The reason why he doesn't want to get involved in the debate right now and why he's disappeared off and doesn't want to get involved is because he would be cutting off his nose to spite his face. He will have gone against his Brexit promises if he cuts off the expansion of Heathrow.
Yeah.
The expansion of Heathrow is essential for us to have any sort of business after we leave the EU. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's also, though, Slightly depressing on an environmental front to think that the planes will be flying over the biggest single market in the world in order, hopefully, to do business on the other side of it and burning 10 tonnes of fuel an hour or whatever it is in the meantime. I mean, it's just nuts. Absolutely nuts.
Insane. It's insane. We're living in crazy Trumpian times.
Yeah, I know we are, but lots of people have legitimate concerns, mate, you know. Legitimate.
Yeah, you're right. As always, you're right, sir.
Legitimate concerns. No, I'll take care. Lots of listeners piling in on the Northern Ireland front, for which I'm very, very grateful. You must remind me of issues that you think we should be discussing more, things that have national impact on both sides of the Irish Sea. 11:55 is the time. Peter is in Uxbridge. What do you think, Peter?
I think he should resign.
Well, don't hold your breath, mate.
Well, the man's totally untrustworthy. He's a liar. He's lied most of his political life.
But can I ask you a question? Because you know you're preaching to the choir on this one, and indeed anyone with a functioning cerebral cortex will recognise the veracity of what you say. How do you think he gets away with it?
The gullible public.
But that's patronising, condescending and sneering.
Yeah, of course it is. But they're gullible public. They saw him on Have I Got News For You and he endeared himself to them. Then he lied his way to be the Mayor of London. Now he lied his way to be my MP.
But it's not quite the answer I need, because everyone knows this.
It's the answer you get.
But they're not gullible. They know he's a liar and they don't care. This is why the last fellow referred to Donald Trump, because Donald Trump lies on a level that it's beyond infantile. He lies as easily as he breathes, and it's not the case that people.
You've been doing this job a long time.
I have.
You tell me how people can be so gullible. You've talked to far more people than me, and
well, you're going to have to buy my book.
You're still off.
I can't give it out for free. I can't give it out for free. Published in November. How to Be Right in a World Gone Wrong, mate. I'll put you down for 6 copies. You can give it to all your family for Christmas.
The thing is that Heathrow Airport have lied through their teeth. They told us they wouldn't want a fourth terminal. They come for a 4th terminal. They told us they wouldn't want a 3rd runway. They come for a 3rd runway. If they get this, they'll be back for a 5th terminal, and they'll be back for a 4th runway.
Where will it end?
Interminable liars.
Interminable terminal liars.
Exactly, yeah. But the fact is, that's exactly what Heathrow Airport have done to this whole community out here for the last 50 years. They keep lying and lying and lying. They change their chief executives, they move aside, then the next lot come in, they want another. And I don't believe it should go to Gatwick. I really think that they should be talking about not having any runways anywhere.
What?
I don't see why... I don't see
why... Are we going on holiday, Pete?
The fact is, there's loads of other ways you can do it, but that's another question. The aviation industry worldwide has got far too much clout and far too much say on all governments throughout the world.
And this was where Zach Goldsmith was making sense yesterday when he talked about them. And I know it's a little unfair of me to just say that because he's inherited an awful lot of money, he must somehow be sympathetic to the interests of big business. When he refers to the government kowtowing to these business interests, that's what he's talking about.
Well, exactly. And the aviation industry has got far, far, far too much clout.
Why does it...
About jobs. Jobs keeps coming up. They've got the unions on board about jobs and the rest of it. The fact is that they're not looking at the future of what's dumping over us. You live under the flight.
I do.
In Chiswick. Yeah. You know very well. You know, you find film on your car, and we're having this dumped on us all the time. Kids over our way in schools. Asthma is over 60% in schools. You know, this is.
And the noise.
It's right, and it's invisible.
Yeah.
You know, this.
Why does it wind you up so much? Is it just because you've lived there all your life and you're just watching it get worse and worse and worse?
Exactly, and we're putting up with the traffic. You know, they're taking no notice of the increased traffic that will come. They want another motorway, expand the motorways. Everything over this way for the last 30 or 40 years has been geared to the airport. Industry has gone. There's warehouses there now on minimum wage supporting the airport. You know, it's not all gravy to a lot of the workers over there.
No, I know. It's tough, though, because on the other hand, a lot of people do rely upon the airport for their livelihoods, albeit that as a result of that, they're breathing the air that you just so poetically and unpleasantly describe. Peter, I live for calls like yours, passionate, informed, knowledgeable. Thank you for paying me and all my listeners the compliment of calling in.